So yeah, first and foremost, thank you, GeekyAnts team to organizing this event and having me here. Uh, I will a little information about myself. I'm a backend developer, as she informed you. So I'm working in Skillovilla. I'm a 2023 grad, and I will be speaking about Spring Security improvements in a Spring Security 6 version that has been released earlier. So yeah, let's continue with the topic. So Spring Security, what is Spring Security? That's first question, right? So what is Spring Security? So the basic answer is Spring Security is a built-in model provided in our Spring framework that allows us to secure our application from outside intrusions, as you can say. And it's a very customizable package that can be used in our application to secure our resources. Okay, so it has certain functionalities such as authentication, authorization, and it also protects us from common exploits such as cross-site forgery, request forgery, CSRF, and many things. So going further, as we are talking about authentication and authorization, so authentication, if you talk about authentication, is something that allows a user, like we make use of authentication to check whether the user is valid or not before letting him enter in our ecosystem. Okay, and in the other hand, authentic authorization. So how authorization works is we ensure like suppose we have a 10 or 20 set of resources on our website and we want a specific set of users to access only 10 of the resources that are available on our application. So we give the authorization of only access to those resources that are there in that are accessible for a specific user. So this is how authorization works. Going further, we'll see the security architecture, Spring security architecture, how it works, and what is the how it is implemented in the security environment application. Sorry, Spring security environment. So yeah, this is a diagram. So we'll be seeing this security implementation in respect of backend server, like when you request hits our backend server API. So let's suppose, first of all this, suppose you started your application. So if you have enabled this Spring security feature, so at first you will get a form, or if you're using a form-based login, you'll get a form that will ask you for username and password. So let's suppose client has given his username and password, and we'll see how this username and password is going through all the authentication process and coming back and giving the user the access of our application. So let's suppose user has given his username and password in the request. So first it will come to our delegating filter proxy. So what it does is it's internally a set of filters before it hits our backend servers, not servers, backend implementations. So what it does is it creates a authentication request object that will have some set of fields such as is authenticated. So after creating a authentication request object, this delegating filter proxy doesn't have the capability to authenticate the user. Okay, so what it does is it creates an authentication request body with the username and password that is coming through the client request, and then pass it to authentication manager. Okay, so this authentication manager on the third point, it's nothing but an interface. Okay, and it has a method called authenticate. So this authenticate method can authenticate the user. Okay, but the point is authentication manager is interface, so it does not have any implementation to check whether the user is a valid user or not. So at this point it makes use of this provider manager. So this is the implementation of authentication manager interface, where it checks the authentication request object coming through the authentication manager and verifies the type of authentication the client is trying to do. So suppose here we are using username and password. So the provider manager first checks the type of authentication provider that is capable of handling this request. So in our application, we can have multiple type of authentication provider. It can be a token-based authentication. It can be a username and password-based authentication, and even OAuth authentication. So first it checks the user request is capable of handling which type of authentication provider. So suppose the authentication provider right now, based on this diagram, if the user is passing username and password, the authentication provider here is this username and password based authentication provider. So the provider manager passes this authentication request object to authentication provider, and now the authentication provider have the job to fetch the data from the database and check the credentials passed by the client and verify it whether the user is a correct user or not. So at this point, the authentication provider requests the details from the user service and matches the client's request coming through authentication request object and then verifies it. So at this place, based on my assumption, the user has given the correct authentication and password. So here, what will happen is authentication provider will create a authentication response object and then pass it to the provider manager. And later, the provider manager will pass the same request object to the authentication part that is available in a delegating filter proxy. So at this point, the client has been authenticated. We have verified the user is already existing in our database, and now we have to make him like we have to allow him to access our resources that is in our application. So after this, at the step of 10, what we are doing is we are making use of the security context holder, and we are setting this authentication object in the security context holder. So the question is, what is security context holder? So what it does is it keeps track of all the authenticated users that are there in our application. So right now, suppose this authentication response object we have got, and now we are setting in the security context holder. It will make sure suppose he's going for a like he's going within your application and trying to access a different source. So we should not send him to again on the same login sign up flow, right? Because he already authenticated. So this security context holder makes sure once the user is authenticated, we have to pass him further in a process. If you want to access some stuff, you want to see his profile, you want to set some values, like he want to buy something in a e-commerce environment. So he should be able to do that rather than going login sign up again and again. So security context holder holds the data of the authenticated user. I hope this is clear, and we'll go with the further slides. The same thing, how it works, that filter intercepts requests and just goes through the same flow. The same thing is written here. I will pass out further. Improvements. So here we are coming on improvements of Spring Security 6. So Spring Security 6 is a major release in last few months or years, like 1 year back, I think. So there are some major features that has been added in Spring Security 6. And if you're trying to make use of Spring Security 6 in our upcoming projects or the currently existing projects, we have to make some changes to be compatible with the security perspective that they have given. So as example, they have deprecated this web security configure adapter class. So earlier, what we used to do is when we had to like define the security of our application, we used to extend this web security configure adapter class, and then you make use of this configure method to define our endpoints and giving them a specific accesses, like which APIs will be open to public, which will be or which must be authenticated, and all these parts. So now this is deprecated. And the second point is introduction to security filter chain. So once it is deprecated, they have to give some other things to configure our authentication part, right? So here comes the security filter chain. So this is a new class that has been provided by Spring Security 6, where we can define our configuration properly. So what we have to do is we have to make use of the security filter chain bean and create our configuration. And then we have to define our rules. Like suppose right now, suppose we have a 20 or 30 set of APIs. You want certain APIs to be accessible by a certain type of users that have a specific role. So that thing you can configure in Spring Security 6. We'll see further. I have an example coming up. I will just show you how we can configure this part. We'll go with the next slide. So this is improved support for OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect. So Spring Security 6 has improved the support for these two authentication processes, where OAuth 2.0 is mostly the Google authentication, and where like suppose you want to authenticate yourself from a different source rather than going with the Spring Security or normal flow, you can do that too. And they have improved the authentication part. Okay, and then we'll go to the next feature. So next feature for securing reactive applications. So reactive applications is something where the application makes use of these web sockets and synchronous HTTP requests, where we don't have to restrict user from currently executing thread. So what happens is the in the very basic level, reactive application is something that have non-blocking that supports non-blocking IO. So suppose you are accessing an application, and now you have if you're using OAuth 2.0. So the Google, suppose you went to the Google authentication part, you clicked on that Google authentication part, you went to the Google server, and then you verify yourself, and then you return back to application. So this kills your primary execution thread. So to improve this part, they have improved the uh, they have introduced some other features that we will see further. I think I have mentioned it earlier. I think coming slides, I will just show you. Okay, so this comes with the migration requirement. So yeah, so Spring Security 6. So suppose we are like most of the people right now are using Spring older versions, even Spring older versions and the security older versions too. And what if we are trying to move from the older versions to a newer versions? These are some of the checklists that we have to follow to be compatible with the newer versions of Spring Security. Okay, so as mentioned here, that must use Java 8 or higher. So this means if you are using Spring Security 6, you must use Java 8 version or higher, like JDK 17 at least, and must use Spring Boot 2.7 or higher. So this is the case when you are using, if you are using 2.7, you can use a lower version of Java, but if you are using Spring Boot any version more than 3, you have to make sure you are using JDK 17 and over of the over versions. And the third point is make you must use the security filter chain bean instead of web security configure adapter. As we know, this class has been deprecated, so we must use this security filter chain class to configure our authentication part. And then this must use the enable web security annotation. So this is annotation that is replacing our configuration annotation from the security class. So if you're using this security filter chain bean, you have to annotate it with the enable web security annotation to make it compatible with the configurations, and let the Spring Boot allows you to have this configuration in your system, in your application. And the next is must use the authorized request method. So they have, in short, if you're using making use of the Spring Security 6, you must use the authorized request method to define your endpoints, and then verify, then allow them to have certain roles, and based on that they can configure. And the next point is must use the expression based access control instead of pre-authenticated access control. So what it means is it's mainly for the reactive applications. Actually, I don't have much context about reactive application, but the very basic, on the very basic level, is something as pre-authenticated access control is something. But like suppose you are using OAuth to control authentication type in your application. So when you click on the Google based authentication part, you go on the Google website, verify yourself, come back, and then continue with the further flow. So in that case, the Spring Security 6 is ensuring us to make use of this expression based access control rather than pre-authenticated, because it will not kill the primary execution thread, and it will continue with the same flow of execution rather than going on a different website, confirming and then coming back and continuing with the security purpose. Then the next point is must use the over2 client bean. So this is something, but they have deprecated this over2 client configure class. Instead of that, we have to make use of this over2 client to configure our over2 client based authentication process. Okay, let's see an example of implementation of this Spring Security 6 and Spring Boot 3 version. Let's see how we can configure our beans and classes to be compatible with the Spring Security 6 implementation. So yeah, so as you can see, this is a Spring Security class where I'm using. I have annotated this class as enable web security. So it, at default, it enables the security on our application, and I have created a bean with security filter chain, and it's taking parameters HTTP security, and later I'm using this HTTP object. I'm using this authorized HTTP request, and then using this lambda to define those endpoints and have given a specific roles to those endpoints. So suppose I have written authorized request dot request matcher home casual dot has role user. So what it means is this endpoint, especially the slash home slash casual, will be accessible to the users, accessible to the clients that have a specific role as user. If any other person or client having different role cannot access this endpoint, same way we have this home admin that will be accessible only by person who is having a role as admin. Same way, may I've written request matcher home slash public. So this is a public API. So it will be available for any person who is using this, using our application. And at the end, I have notated this dot form login. So it will make use of this form login method to take the credentials from user and pass it to the backend server. And the next slide. So yeah, so storing the details of the user, I'm making use of this user details service. It's an in-memory detail manager. So I have created two users. One is a casual user. I've given my name, and the role is user. And the second one is admin. User title is admin. So I have created an admin user having roles as admin. So I will show you how the API works when we are using different roles to log in, and then trying to figure out which API we have to click on. So this is a controller layer where I have created three APIs. One is for casual user, and like it's a having a role user. Any client having a role user can access this normal slash normal API. If not, he can't access. The second one is has role admin. So same way, if user has admin role, then only he can access this API, and the public is available for everyone. So let's suppose I'm login as a Vikrant, like the normal user. So first thing, if I try to hit any API, I will get this form. I have to put up my credentials. Then I click on sign in. I will be able to access the API that is annotated as casual user because I'm a normal user. My role is given as user, so I will be able to access this only this API and a public API. So same way, if I go for public/public, I'm able to access the public API. But what if I try to go with the slash admin API? So yeah, so being a user, having a role user, I can't access this API having slash admin because I don't have the role that is required for this API. So it is failing here. The next slide. So yeah, so what I did log out and then again logged in as an admin, and then I tried to hit the same API slash admin. So I was able to access this, and I'm getting the response whatever it is, and so yeah, so this is how the underlying security works, and these are the new features that has been introduced in Spring Security 6. We have this has role. I think it's very important and very useful for us to having this has role functionality because we can define certain. Suppose we have an application having multiple endpoints, and we want some endpoints to be used only by admins. We can just give them a role and assign all those APIs to them. We don't have to create our optional auths and mandatory auths and basic auths, all those things to handle by different use cases. So yeah, this is how it is handled now. There are a lot of things to explore in Spring Security. I'm not going much deeper in that, but yeah, we can explore. It's a new feature, so it has multiple functionality. It will be improving further too. So yeah, this is from my side, and this is the last slide. I have listed out resources that I was using, and yeah, that's it. So I will hand up the stage to the next person. I think it's end from my side. Thank you.